This is the Cortex Athletic Review. I'm your host, Evan Carrillo, and each week I dive into the research to distill and relate sports science and psychological peer-reviewed literature to modern-day coaching and athletic development with a slight bias to hockey goaltenders. We're back. I'm calling this season 2, although the season is really based on nothing other than I wanted a little bit of a break. I had that little bit of a break, and now that we're officially in summer vacation, if you have anything to do with the primary or secondary school system in Alberta at least, it's just a good time to get into some new articles. A fair bit has happened since the last episode. It was actually really good timing for me to take a little bit of a break. We got really busy with track and field, and if you are outside of the Edmonton area, the weather here for the last week or so has been just sideways rain. It's been terrible. We got rained out of a couple of different zone track meets, so we had to reschedule those, and there was a whole mess with that. The article this week is pretty recent. Again, came out in May of just this year, so a couple of months ago now. It's called Optimizing Athlete Travel for Performance, a scientific blueprint for athletes, coaches, and sports medicine staff. And this was published in the Journal of Sports Medicine, again in 2026. The authors, there's a whole list of them here. The first one listed is Nicholas Hattemia and Kristen E. Holmes. It looks like Nicholas Hattemia is from the Department of Orthopedic Surgery and the Department of Family and Community Medicine from the University of California in San Francisco. Some of the key points that as athlete travel becomes more prevalent, particularly long-haul travel crossing multiple time zones, the impacts of travel on athletic performance should be considered as they pertain to jet lag, travel-related fatigue, fueling, gastrointestinal disturbances, environmental conditions, illness, and then soft tissue injury. I have done some sleep articles before as well as some travel articles. My intent is for this to serve as a little bit of a framework and a roadmap, as it just kind of lays out some of the factors to consider for athletes as well as for coaches or parents. So it sort of hits a lot of the different bases there. I'll jump into the introduction here, and in the article, there's a pretty cool little graphic. I think it's really valuable to look at and can be easily processed by pretty much anybody. There's a wheel with the center of the wheel titled Athlete Performance, and around it, there's 8 different factors that they have influencing this. One of those is jet lag. The next is sleep disturbances, then chronotype, so some of the biology of the individual person. Something called microbiome dysbiosis, hydration, fueling and nutrition, and fueling in this case is just referring to the food that's being eaten along the traveling path, soft tissue injury, and then illness and infection. So let's dive into the article. The central idea that this paper suggests is that travel itself, the act of traveling within the day or within that performance necessity, is itself a physiological stressor. It's not just kind of a logistical thing that has to happen and then people worry about the performance once they get there. They point out that the elite athletes often arrive at the game already carrying a lot of these hidden stressors that are just not viewable to most of the public watching. Things like the circadian disruption, especially if you've gone across different time zones. Dehydration. In a previous episode, authors note how breathing in the drier cabin air in the airplane, especially for long-haul flights, can lead to more dehydration if you are unaware of that and don't account for it. Poor sleep, that's a given. Trying to sleep on an airplane is not for everybody. Some people can fall asleep immediately, others, there's just no chance. I'm more of a window seat guy myself. I very rarely will fall asleep on an airplane. If I can spend some time looking out the window and looking around at things from perspective that we don't really get that often. I'm usually pretty busy doing that for most of the flight. So this will sound familiar from last episode or one of the previous episodes now. The authors separate two different travel related concepts that a lot of people kind of conflate or confuse together. Those are jet lag and travel fatigue. And a reminder, jet lag and travel fatigue are not the same thing. So, jet lag is a mismatch between your internal biological clock, your circadian rhythms, and the local time with wherever you're at. If you've gone on a long flight east and you end up losing a lot of hours and you have to advance your clock, that tends to wreak havoc on our biology a little bit more than traveling west, especially if it's pretty extreme. So if you get somewhere your body thinks it's 9 o'clock p.m., for example, but the local time is only 2 p.m., even if you slept 8 hours, your physiology is still behind. It's still running on the completely wrong schedule. And it takes some time to adjust for that. Travel fatigue, on the flip side of that, is different than jet lag. You can have travel fatigue and it's just staying within the exact same time zone. You can have a pretty severe case of travel fatigue by taking a 45-minute flight, even. And that travel fatigue, just think of that as the stressors and the annoyances of flying. So, sitting in the airport, going through security, dealing with your baggage, extra dehydration, eating airport food, airport stress, dealing with crowds, carrying bags, poor meals, trying to sleep upright, or a noisy cabin, or some babies crying. Just inserting some irregularity to what would be sort of a normal routine could be considered travel fatigue. The authors highlight the importance and the role, I guess, of circadian rhythms in athletic performance or just in normal, optimal biological functioning. This paper explains that many athletic abilities naturally will kind of fluctuate throughout the day. So, everything from your reaction time, your coordination, even your strength, different hormone releases, your body temperature, your alertness, those are not all constant throughout the day. There are different times where each of those things are just a little bit more optimal or optimized. There's an optimal time of the day in a 24-hour day for your reaction time. There's an optimal time for your coordination. There's an optimal time for your strength. In other words, your body already has a preferred time to perform. Traveling moves that schedule around, it buggers it up a little bit. So instead of trying to perform at a time that is normally at your biological peak for, say, body temperature or coordination or reaction time, you might be performing at a biological time that's different from a local time that still requires optimal reaction time, despite the fact that your body is not biologically in that time at that moment. A little fun fact that they put in here is that usually traveling east is harder to adapt to than traveling west. This is pretty well established in a lot of the sleep research, and it's something that even just in the short time that I've been doing these episodes, it has come up a few times, and again, it's pretty well supported. If you're traveling east across different time zones, that requires a phase advance for your body clock. So you're losing hours. It's going to be later in the day from what your body is used to. It means that you have to go to sleep earlier, which most people aren't super great at. Whereas traveling west, you're delaying your body clock. So you gain those hours. It just means that to adjust, you have to stay up a little bit later. Give yourself, if you can, approximately 1 day per time zone crossed for full circadian adjustment. So, what that means is if you cross one time zone, east or west, but east especially, give yourself about a day to adjust to that. It's certainly not an instantaneous adjustment. Going west, it's a little bit less, like from the research, I think it was only about half of a day that's required. If you cross two or say four time zones going east, that's roughly 4 days that it's going to take your body to fully adjust to that. And same thing, going four time zones west will be four, maybe a little bit less because the body likes moving west a little bit more. Now, in the world of professional sports, they don't really get that luxury. I suppose part of that, like just logistically and reducing the amount of hours traveled, would be like why pro sports teams tend to go on these longer road trips, week or 2 week or 3 week road trip, especially out east. If they can get there a little bit early and start the biological adaptation process, then they're going to be in a better spot when they're playing in those multiple time zone difference locations. The authors repeatedly return to sleep as the biggest performance intervention. And that's for the simple reason that mostly every travel problem has something to do with sleep. While getting a good sleep isn't going to like boost your reaction time, having a poor sleep unfortunately has the effect of diminishing all of these things, which is a little bit tricky in the world of sports with this guideline of one recovery day per time zone travel. But, it's just unrealistic much of the time, but that's just sort of an ideal guideline. And if you can work that into your travel schedule, then try and work it into your travel schedule, I suppose. The authors cite an illness connection, and this one was a little bit surprising. I mean, it's kind of intuitive. Athletes traveling internationally, especially across more than five time zones, may experience a 2 to 3-fold increase in illness during the following week. Why might this be? There's a couple of reasons that are listed. Even things like unfamiliar food, not your usual food from your usual places. And again, this dehydration, breathing in this conditioned air, and then just the added stress that your body is under. I don't know of a lot of people who love traveling and love sitting in an airport and love waiting in line at customs or security. It's just some added stress. And while maybe not terrible acutely, over some time, if it's elevated, it will have some kind of an impact. The authors then dive into a little bit more on hydration and speak to the cabin environment as being a little bit harsher for hydration purposes than a lot of people might realize. So, if you're an athlete, just consider this: aircraft cabins are usually kept at pretty low humidity, like below 20% humidity. And the air pressure that you would be experiencing in a cabin is a little bit lower as well. So, you're flying in an airplane to go somewhere. The pressure that you're feeling is not one atmosphere as if you're just outside on ground level. It's about the same as if you were at an 8,000 foot altitude. The result of this cabin pressure and conditioned air, it's not necessarily a dramatic body weight loss of water or major reduction in hydration, but reduced blood plasma volume. And the effect that that has is it increases cardiovascular strain when you return to training or competition. So, to put another way, the body put in that low pressure, air conditioned environment for some number of time reduces the blood plasma volume. And if you try to compete or train with that still low blood plasma, that actually puts your cardiovascular system into some added strain. So, to get around this, the authors have some recommendations. Start the flight well hydrated. And I know that leads to other issues like having to get up and go use that tiny little bathroom on the airplane. Drink consistently during travel. So just sipping that water during the travel. Electrolytes are preferred to water alone for maintaining that plasma volume. This probably isn't geared towards the athletes as much, but they also suggest to avoid alcohol, especially when flying to somewhere for competition. And then use caffeine strategically rather than just continuously, rather than just habitually going to stop at the airport Starbucks for your $12 coffee. Avoid it if you can and use it strategically, like if you need to be using it to stay awake a little bit longer, to phase advance over some time zones or something. Let's launch into the section now that's a little bit newer, a little bit novel. This one didn't really come up in the previous research. This one is all about the microbiome. So, in other words, your gut health. International travel specifically is going to affect your diet for sure, the timing of your meals, your sleep. International travel also leads to some heightened stress, usually. And each of these things can and usually does influence the gut microbiome, so your gut health. The authors do explore the idea of probiotics, but their findings weren't super conclusive. Their conclusion was pretty measured. They say that they may help some athletes with a history of travel related gastrointestinal issues, but there isn't really a lot of evidence to recommend them for everybody universally. Then there's the matter of different chronotypes. And all that means is everybody is going to respond to travel differently. Some athletes are naturally more morning types. They'll kind of wake up before their alarm, or they'll wake up early on in the morning and they're kind of alert nice and early. Some athletes are more night owls, the evening types, and they just like to stay up a little bit later. And then there's a bunch that are just kind of intermediate in between those two. The authors in this paper suggest that this could influence how quickly athletes adapt to the travel. So, for example, morning athletes may tolerate eastward travel better, which is quite valuable. And then those evening type athletes, those night owls, may adapt better to westward travel because to adapt to that, you just have to stay up a little bit longer. The evidence on this, unfortunately, is still mixed. Towards the end of the paper, the authors do propose some practical recommendations. And this is the part that, if you just kind of glazed over during that previous bit of explanation, this is the part to sort of build your framework around. One of the strengths of this review is that it translates that science into actionable strategies. And the authors propose 9 big things as the travel recommendations. So I'll start with those. The first, begin shifting your sleep schedule 3 to 7 days before departure if possible. That to me sounds like a best case scenario in a perfect world thing. If you're traveling east, I guess they would want you to try and go to bed a little bit earlier and perhaps wake up a little bit earlier to try and adjust for that a little bit. But even then, we still have to live our lives while we're in our current place. So we are a little bit limited to that. Number 2 is get strategic bright light exposure after arrival to help reset your circadian clock. They don't honestly go into a lot more information about that one. The third is to use melatonin at the correct local bedtime when appropriate. So if you are trying to phase advance your circadian rhythm, that means you're trying to just fall asleep a little bit earlier than you're used to falling asleep. Melatonin is probably going to be something that helps you there. The fourth, and I would love to get on board with this, is nap strategically. They suggest 20 to 30-minute naps without replacing that nighttime sleep. If I could, I would nap every single day. I just unfortunately live a life where that is not possible most days. The authors are suggesting to take advantage of naps. Again, everybody's going to be a little bit different. Some people find that if they nap during the day, they have a harder time falling asleep at night. Maybe that's what you need. For example, if you have done a lot of westward travel and you need to kind of keep yourself up a little bit later, having that daytime nap might help you do so. Likewise, if you've just traveled eastward and you're used to taking a nap, you might want to cut that out just to try to promote some earlier falling asleep ability. The fifth one is keep a consistent sleep schedule after arrival. Try not to have your falling asleep and then your wake up schedules totally wonky and completely different every day. Give your circadian system and your biology something to latch onto, a bit of an anchor in terms of what it has to adapt to. The next is align your meals with the destination's local time as soon as possible. So try to eat your breakfast at the same local time that you'd be eating breakfast at, meaning if you usually wake up and eat your breakfast at 7:30 a.m., Once that local time of 7:30 a.m. hits, try to time that meal to happen at that local time. Likewise with your lunch and your dinner. The next one is stay hydrated and use electrolytes when appropriate and give your body enough water to make those biological functions happen nice and seamlessly as they're intended. The next is to delay intense training until you've had an opportunity to recover. During these phase advances or phase delays after some time zone travel, your body is actually already working to recover in a way that you might not consciously be aware of. Like you're probably not going to have sore legs like after you just did a leg workout or something, but your body is still in a recovery mode. And finally, minimize evening caffeine if you are trying to adapt to a new time zone. Now, they didn't specifically say if this was east or west bound travel. I would suspect that having some evening caffeine after a lot of westward travel might not be the worst thing. If you are just trying to stay up a little bit later and you need that caffeine with those adenosine receptors that kind of fool your body into being less tired than it actually is. You can look up this paper. It is free to download online if you just type in the title. It does include a summary and has some useful tables even that organize these interventions by travel phase. So like before travel, during travel, and after travel to make it as useful as possible as sort of a field guide for athletes, parents, and coaches. The paper itself doesn't feel so much like a peer-reviewed academic review. It actually does feel like kind of a useful framework and field guide for athletic performance and traveling. The authors cite some stories from professional baseball that actually show that teams whose internal clocks were better aligned with the local game time actually won more often than their opponents whose clocks were still a little bit misaligned, that were still a little bit off. So, two equally skilled teams can have some different probabilities of winning just because one team's biology is closer to that optimal peak performance when the game time starts. Again, just another reminder that the authors note that comes up repeatedly in this paper that travel planning and scheduling should be viewed as part of that performance and not just this formality that goes around it. So that wraps up this paper. There are some limitations that I do want to bring to light to everybody. This is what's called a narrative review. So it's not a systematic review or like a meta-analysis. So it's relying more on narrative and qualitative data rather than the quantitative stuff. So, for example, a lot of these recommendations that the authors propose rely on studies from different sports and competition levels and not exclusively on one sport or another. I'm not too concerned about that, to be honest. I feel like high level competition, you still have to factor in these things that kind of hinge on getting a good sleep. One more factor, and I hope this doesn't steer people away, is a lot of the authors in this paper were affiliated with Whoop. And Whoop, if you're unfamiliar, it's a wearable fitness and recovery platform aimed at really serious athletes and performance-minded people. It's different than, say, Apple Watch or Garmin. Whoop isn't really trying to tell you the time or like have these other features like navigation or anything. Its entire purpose is to answer just the question of how ready is your body to perform today? It does seem like there could be some use to it. I'm just sort of looking it up right now too. It's just a piece of wearable technology. It can be a lightweight wristband or arm sleeve, even a sports bra or sports underwear base layer. Doesn't have a screen on it, just continuously collects physiological data and sends it to an app on your phone where the app then analyzes. So not to pump up this at all. I've got no affiliation with Whoop at all whatsoever, but just to point out that a couple of these authors that are interested in the sleep study are affiliated with this product. Okay, that does it for this week's episode. I'm going to go to producing one episode every 2 weeks rather than putting out an episode every single Thursday. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on distribution rather than just production of these episodes. So that's the plan for right now. Again, that might change, so just listen up in future episodes in the direction that I want to take this. If you would like to reach out, I would love to answer any questions that people have. I would like to get in contact with people. I would even be willing to explore something like having a co-host on that we can kind of talk back and forth together and openly discuss these different weekly or bi-weekly articles that we review. I know listening to a single person speak for a long enough time is not always the most engaging, so it is a direction that I have thought about and that I would be willing to take on with this. So reach out if you could potentially be interested in that. Doesn't mean that it's going to be a yes, but I would still love to hear from some of the listeners that are out there. These episodes you can find on Apple, you can find on wherever you listen to your podcasts. They're available on YouTube at the channel Cortex Goaltender Development. If you would like to support the show, which does have some costs involved, including some articles that are in the pipeline that are actually behind a paywall, you can head on over to patreon.com/Cortex Athletic Review. Again, I am planning, I know I said this probably months ago, but I am planning on boosting that up as well to have some actual incentives for the different tiers of support. Thanks for listening. I hope this episode was useful in some way, whether you're parent, coach, or athlete. My name is Evan Carrillo. This is the Cortex Athletic Review. Stay out of your own way.